Okay, well, we've got a reasonable number of people in the audience, so I'll start. What I'm going to do, for those people who didn't hear me earlier, is I'm going to run through an abbreviated version of the presentation I did at the Mug Summer Show. And then I'll look at what I've done since the revised second edition appeared on the archive website. And I'll introduce something else I've been looking at, which is not entirely unrelated to Dr. Wimp's surgery. And what I must stress, if anybody's got any questions at all, you can stop me in full flow, I don't mind. Because if you don't ask when you think of it, you might well forget it altogether. Well, I'm going to share my screen now, and I'll run the presentation. Okay, well, if anybody's got any idea who I am, can you please send me a postcard, please? That'd be most helpful. And basically, what am I going to talk about? Well, Dr. Wimp in passing and Dr. Wimp's surgery in particular. I'll talk about how I came to be involved in it, what I actually did, and what's going to happen next. So first of all, Dr. Wimp, if you don't know already, an application to aid the writing of Wimp programs. It was first launched by Andrew Eyre in 1995. And he was the original author, and he looked after it. He was the original author until 1999, at which point Ray Faver stepped in, and he looked after it until his untimely death in 2010. Since then, there have been some updates to the core of Dr. Wimp's surgery, but they've been mainly under the hood changes which have improved matters, but haven't actually impacted too much on the user-facing side of things. So Ray originally wrote this book, Dr. Wimp's Surgery, in order to support the programming suite. And he produced the first edition in 1998. I can actually show you that later on, because a copy of the file was found, and Jim Nagel had it on the archive website. Ray produced the second edition in 2003, and that was the last one that he produced. Now, the question is, what am I doing here? And that all goes back to the London show in 2019, when I went to collect my archive magazine from Jim Nagel, and he posed me a question, and he said, "Can you help me with a project?" Or I think, in fact, the first thing he said was, "I hear you've got some OCR software." And when I admitted I had, he says, "Then can you help me with a project?" The project was to recreate Dr. Wimp's surgery. The reason for that was that after Ray's death, all the impression files and the printing masters had gone walkabout. And although Ray's daughter and Jim had made great efforts to try and locate them, nothing could be found. Anyway, I didn't step back quickly enough, and so I was hooked, and Jim reeled me in. So how did I actually go about it? Well, first of all, I had to use Windows for the scanning and the OCR. And I ended up using RISC OS for the editing, the layout, and the publishing. Within a couple of weeks of the of the show, I produced a couple of sample chapters to show to Jim. They were both two different versions of one chapter. Jim was quite pleased with them. So this would be middle of November, but I never got the go-ahead. And it wasn't until the new year that we learned Jim's death. And so at that point, I abandoned the project. But then during lockdown, I restarted it as a vanity project, something to keep me going. So how did I do it? Well, when I did the samples, because I'd already got the book, which fortunately was in spiral bound form, I was able to open it on my Epson flatbed scanner. It wasn't entirely easy to get things done that way, but for the chapter it was all right. When I came to do the whole book, on the other hand, I sacrificed the spiral binding, and with the automatic document feeder on my Brother laser printer scanner, I was able to manage it quite adequately. The automatic document feeder could take up to 50 pages at a time. Unfortunately, you have to turn them over, and so you end up with a load of scans where the actual scan numbers don't actually equate with the page numbers in the book. And of course, once you start feeding the scans into the OCR, it's handy if you know what the sequence of pages is. So I spent a lot of time changing all the file names of the individual scans. Now, once I'd done that, I carried out the editing on RISC OS. The scanning was controlled from my old Windows 7 box, on which I'd got Virtual RISC PC. So I saved the output from FineReader as a Word file. There's several options. I could have just had a pure text file, or other formats are available. But I thought, if I save it as a Word file, once it's transferred to my ARMX6 over ShareFS, then I could load the Word files into TextWriter and save the output as pure text there. And of course, my reasoning was that TextWriter would understand the Word files very well, and any infelicities between what Microsoft thinks is a text file and what we understand as a text file would be ironed out by TextWriter. So then I had to begin to edit it, and it was hard work, really. I started to use convert text to catch the mistakes, and I did it on a file-by-file basis. I think the reason I did it file by file was because I'd only had the one file when I did the sample chapter. I've since learned that there are easier ways of doing it. But what I found was that there was always another mistake to catch. You think you've got everything, and then you spot another thing that needs to be changed. So you have to edit the script in convert text, and it became altogether a little bit too tedious. So I then had to do some more editing on RISC OS, and this is where I made not a mistake, but I could have made life a lot easier for myself. And my only defense is that it seemed like a good idea at the time. So what I did was to load single chapters into impression, chapter at a time, and use impression, use its search and replace facility to do the editing. course, in retrospect, what I should have done was loaded the whole text in and done it all in one go. But you know, this is the sort of thing you get to understand after the event. What I've also discovered, of course, is that all the single files that I'd created from TechWriter, I could have loaded them all into StrongEd and edited them all simultaneously. But, you know, you live and learn. Now, the big problem with the layout was that we had no file for the second edition. The first edition file that was discovered by Jim Nagel was worked in A4, and it was then printed out as A4 sheets, and the printer reduced them to A5. Well, that was no good to me. So what I did was I had to guess at the frame sizes. I had to guess at the font size. I had to guess at the line spacing. And the font name was very difficult. I could not find a font that matched the one that Ray had used in the book. So I reverted to Trinity. I worked out the frame sizes and the font size and the line spacing basically by using a ruler on the printed page, and with a bit of guesswork, I came up with what I actually produced using Trinity as the base font. So, the one thing I found in impression is that a default impression document doesn't have all the styles that you need. And it turned out that I'd added some styles in impression when I produced the sample chapters for Jim, but unfortunately, I hadn't added them in a logical sequence. I added them as I needed to create them. So the style list ended up as a bit of a mess, and I'll show you how I got out of it later on. New styles always added at the bottom of the list, and it's easy enough to delete styles that you don't use, but then you're left with no logical hierarchy for the style list. So basically what I needed to do was get the list into a sequence which showed the most used styles near the top and you know, the lesser used ones near the bottom. But I had no idea how to go about it, so I got onto the impression mailing list, and I have to say that Harriet Baisley there came to the rescue and told me exactly what I needed to know, and I'll give you a quick shot of that later. Of course, at the same time, I introduced a new function key strip, which was fun in itself. But after much struggling, we got to the end result, and it is a near facsimile of the second edition. If anybody has got the book and has also downloaded the PDF from the archive website, I think you'll agree that we're pretty close to what Ray left us with. Some of the illustrations were the original ones from the first edition. Some are black and white from the scans that I made before I did the OCR. And one or two I've recreated in artworks anyway, the line illustrations in particular. And although I'm quite pleased with the end result, I have to admit that the presentation style is entirely Ray's, and it's not as I would have done it if I'd been in his place. there are some changes that I felt were needed to improve the clarity of the book. Now, excuse me. The things that first struck me, there were three things that first struck me. Ray was very, very fond of starting to go into a phrase using a hyphen. And there are hyphens all over the place, and I just felt it looked very untidy. And there are places where he's put unnecessary emphasis on words that didn't need it. And I suppose one of the biggest problems was that he chose to use Corpus for programs. Now, whilst this gave a very good contrast to the font that he used for the base text, the big problem with Corpus is that it's very difficult to differentiate a 1 from a lowercase l. If anybody remembers the presentation I did last summer, you might have noticed that I referred to Corpus as Courier. I'm terribly sorry, and I promise I won't do it again. But if we look at L's and 1s in Corpus, then, as you can see, it's very, very difficult to tell them apart. So I hunted around and I found Deja Vu Sans Mono and its simplified version, Verity Mono, both of which are on the Pling store. So they're a free download, no problem. And it's quite obvious what's a 1 and what's an L. So that was a major choice that was not very difficult to make. So as things stood last summer, I was very happy with the progress I've made. I decided that I wouldn't do an index because you don't really need an index in a PDF file, you just do a search. I needed to generate new screenshots, which at the time I couldn't do because I didn't have the original programs, but I've been sent those by someone who's offered to help me proofread, and he lives in Iceland, so that was a very pleasant surprise when he responded to this this presentation when he saw it on YouTube. Now, as the editor of Archive, Gavin Smith now has the copyright to all Ray's programs and documents, and he's given me a free hand with the updating of Dr. Wimp's surgery. But I've got to be careful not to abuse that freedom. And in fact, I'm trying only to make changes that aid the clarity of the book. So what's next? Well, I need suggestions and corrections. Occasionally I do find corrections myself. In fact, I found one yesterday that was needed ever since the first edition. But it was a minor thing. And I need help to progress the book. And in this regard, it's a question of have the changes that have been made under the hood, although they shouldn't have affected any user-facing problems, I need to make sure that what Ray had said in the book were limitations and things to look out for haven't actually been ironed out by the updates to the Dr. Wimp library. So I'll need to speak to programs about that, but that's a problem for another day. Now, Gavin wants it to be a work in progress, and as things progress, we can add new versions of the files on the archive website. In fact, I can send him slightly amended versions of the second edition. Now, I said earlier that I wasn't going to do an index, but Gavin's quite keen that there should be a printed edition, so long as he can get enough people who want one to make it financially viable. So it looks as though, after all, I'm going to have to sort out a new index. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, I've got 4 different addresses, 2 of which I can answer from RISC OS. The others I have great difficulty with, but I can get back to you on Thunderbird. So if you 2 of those you might well know from mailing lists that I'm on, but the other 2, both Dr Wimp at one@outlook.com, the other at gmail.com. So, anybody got any questions before I carry on and show you what's been happening?
Yeah, just a quickie from me.
Yeah,
I take it then that the status of the book is the fact that it's a PDF. So is that a free download from yourself?
oh yes, yes, it is. Yeah, it is. There's the only thing that would be charged for would be a printed version of the book, because obviously there are costs to defray.
Right. Well, I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much on this one. I've got an interest in guitar amps and weird electronic bits and bobs. And I got a book voucher for Christmas. Couldn't find it available currently, but went into Waterstones and they said, "Oh yeah, they do a small print run, and then that'll be available probably in a month or so." So obviously, printers can do small print runs. Now, how small is, whether that's 50, 100, 200 or 500, I have no idea. But obviously, these people have decided that after the initial printing of the book, they were going to get less often. So they've decided, yes, we can do a print run of so-and-so, and then we can charge this price for that print run.
Yeah.
So that might be one way of looking at pricing. If you're getting 50 people interested, the price is that.
I've got some info on that as well. I've got a friend in my other tech club who has done his own book, and he said to do a print run of one. £13, his book.
Heck, there you go.
I mean, that's fantastic, isn't it? It's not as big as Dr. Wimp. I think it was about 150 pages. It's to do with his researches into his family background and births and deaths and genealogy. But he's produced it via a company on the internet, and they'll print one. So I can find out more about it if you like.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this is entirely possible, and in fact, my son bought me a printed on demand copy of the biography of a chap called Alan Dower Blumline, which some people may have heard of him. He was involved in all sorts of electronic developments in the 20s and 30s. And during the Second World War, he worked for EMI as one of the developers of the H2S blind bombing system. And of course, his other great claim to fame is he got the original patents for stereo sound when he worked for EMI, or when he first started to work for EMI. And unfortunately, he died in a crash. They went up, or they were working at the Royal Radar Establishment, as it later became, at Malvern, RAF Malvern. And they went up to do some testing, and they had a new young member of the team. And the team leader stepped down to allow this new team member to go up with Blumline and others in the team. And the aircraft unfortunately developed an engine fault, which I believe was a dropped exhaust valve, and it ended up blowing high temperature air onto the wing spar, which failed, and the aircraft crashed along the Wye Valley. And apart from the loss of Blumline, which nobody knew about because the work he was doing was secret, the other thing that I only found out recently was the team leader who stepped down to let this junior member join the flight was Bernard Lovell. And of course, if he'd gone down with the aircraft, you know, we might not have Jodrell Bank now. Anyway, that's by the by. That's one of my hobby horses. When I was teaching, all my students learned about that. So poor old Blumline, nobody knew about him for years. And he was championed in Wireless World by Barry Fox. So if anybody's got any copies of Wireless World from 30 or 40 years ago, you could follow the saga. Okay, now, anybody got any other questions before I move on? I must have got everything.
My only question, I think, John, is, do you say there is a version on the archive website at the moment?
Yes. Yes. It says the book can be found at https://drwimp.archivemag.co.uk. Okay, right, where are we? Let me share my screen again and I'll show you where I've got to. And let's have a look at the development. I decided that when I first created when I started to create or recreate the second edition, I wasn't as pernickety at recording what I'd done as I am now. So for the putative third edition, I've actually got a whole list of experimental folders, if you like, and currently, oh no, I'm up to 9. And on that page, I've not only got the latest version of Dr. Wimp, but I've also got a list of changes. And these changes, rather than end up with a huge text file, as per the previous changes, plus, and then I've listed what I have actually added or changed in this particular version. And in fact, one of the things I've done, in fact, I only did it this morning, was I have a desktop font style, which originally was in Homerton, because that would be the Homerton would be the default desktop font if you started out with a virgin copy of RISC OS. Now, unfortunately, if I just go back and look at the previous version, let's have a look at the okay, what I've done in the previous version, oops, let's reduce bring that down to about 120, that should do it. Now, if I have a look down at where I have used the desktop font, let's find something. Now, if we look at, let me just, there's, well, it's not, it looks like Deja Vu, but it's in fact Verity, the simplified version. And the reason for that is if anybody else wants to edit these files, then if they're working in Virtual RISC PC, then it won't accept Deja Vu. but it will accept the simplified version, Verity. So that's what I've used to show coding. So if I then go back, there are places within the text where, and of course now that I've mentioned it, I can't find it, but oh, here we are. That is item 1. There is it's in Homerton, because that would be the default desktop font. But unfortunately, at first glance, Homerton doesn't look hugely different to Deja Vu. So what I've done in the later version is change the desktop font to Huntington Oblique. Of course, I probably won't be able to find it now, but it just makes it stand out and makes it simpler to follow, even if I'm not simple to follow at the moment. Oh, here we are. So what I've used it for is things that you would see in desktop font if you were looking at the thing that's being referred to on the desktop. Okay, there's an info box, and there's Homerton, but not Huntington Oblique. And I've just changed it to Oblique to make it stand out and be a little more clear. So let's go back. So this is the latest version. Compared with the original, one of the things I felt about the original is that the text looked very dense. And I think this is partly due to the font that Ray had chosen, but also due to the fact it was the actual leading between the lines was quite small. So I've expanded it out, and it now looks much more friendly to the eye. And of course, this should have made the book physically longer, but Ray had a lot of places where the pagination was, well, there was a lot of blank space at the bottom of the page. And so what I've gone through and done is remove this excessive white space where it doesn't serve any purpose. So this is the one of the sample programs that he started out with to show people 3 different ways of writing a Wimp program. One, doing it without any aids whatsoever, except the book of words. Another used templates, and the third used Dr. Wimp. And of course, this first one came up at over 3,000 lines of code, which for a very simple program was really rather excessive. And so he's gone on and showed how you can do it, firstly using templates, which much reduce the workload, and then again using Dr. Wimp, where everything was reduced down to very low overheads. The second version of the test app, he hasn't shown the whole thing in the book. He's basically just shown the changes. And then finally, in Test App 3, which is available from the existing website. Anybody not know where the existing website is? what I'll do is I'll have a look at that shortly. It's a website where you can download the complete Dr. Wimp package, all the software and the manuals and everything else that came in the original floppy disk or CD later on. One thing you might have noticed, I've got these bars in the margin. In fact, this big margin in the middle is where the holes are punched for the spiral binding. So I've left those as they are. But a lot of what Ray chose to think of as important things to bear in mind, he would embolden them and put them in italics, and sometimes the italics and the emboldening were embedded in other paragraphs, and I thought it looked rather messy. So what I've done is those paragraphs which contain the information that needs to be noted, I put this red bar at the side of that paragraph. And it just makes the flow of the text look more user-friendly without actually losing the things that Ray wanted to draw attention to. I'm not necessarily criticizing Ray here, because what you have to bear in mind is that he was not only producing the final version of the book, but he was making sure that everything in it was correct, that he covered everything he needed. So he was being pulled probably in 2 or 3 different directions in the production of the book. Whereas me being a non-programmer, I've only got one thing to worry about. So this is the book as it stands. We've got various, if I can find it there. I'm feeling a bit lost because I haven't got a scroll wheel on this. Well, I've got a scroll wheel, it just doesn't work. So yes, things like this, this graphic came out of the first edition, which I can show you. Just get rid of that. If I go up far enough, I will find the original version, which Jim Nagel had on his website. And in fact, Jim has he put various comments here. This is the original 1998 edition of Ray's book, not his 2003 revision. And there are various panels on the way through where he's made comments about it. But this actually uses Trinity as the default font. But if you compare it with Trinity on mine, you'll see that the lines don't have as much leading as I've got in mine, and I think it looks better to the eye. But some of the graphics I pinched because I didn't, at the time I started on this 3rd edition, I didn't have the programs available to enable me to generate the graphics as I wanted. Now, I think that's quite enough of what I've done with the 3rd edition. I did say that I would show you what I'd done in order to change the styles, change the style list. So if I were to bring up this version and look at the style list, because it would help if I actually found some text. There we are. In the style list in impression, we've got a whole stack of styles here. Now, these were pretty much in the sequence that I wanted. But it's quite easy to change the sequence. And this is what Harriet Bazley told me. So if I come out of that, all you have to do is find some text and just grab a bit and then go to the save dialog, right click, bring up the text story and save it with styles. And so we should be able to grab that and grab that. Ooh, let me get StrongEd open. Should be able to grab that with styles and bring it into StrongEd. So here we have the text file, and it's only got the bit of text that I highlighted. Now, that text I highlighted ran from P down to the full stop after 16. So if I get rid of that, all I'm left with are the style definitions, also color definitions, and they each begin with a left opening brace. And that's a clue to impression that if this is dragged into the document, it won't actually appear as text. It actually is part of the style and effects definitions, although we haven't got any effects in here at the moment. So what I did earlier, let me just discard that. What I did earlier was to I can't get it because unfortunately, there it is. It was hidden behind the bar at the top that very kindly was added by Zoom. There must be a way of hiding that. If anybody knows what it is, can you please tell me? Let's get rid of that. Discard. Now, that style list, this is what I generated earlier. If I wanted, for example, to take the chapter heading style, I can highlight that and it goes all the way down to where it says menu item off. At least I think it is. No, there. So that's what I've highlighted is the entire chapter heading style. And I can move that to wherever in that list I want. And in fact, I've already recreated it here so that instead of after the normal style, we instead of getting chapter heading, it goes straight to side heading, and chapter heading has moved down to below that. So let's close that. Now, if I look at this and go to some text, I'm able to bring up the styles. And what you'll discover is that there are no styles defined. And the reason for that is that earlier on, I deleted them all, which is a rather tedious process because it has to go through the entire document, which is split into goodness knows how many chapters. And you can see that all it has is the normal style. Now, if I take, wherever I put it, if I take the style list there, the modified style list, and it doesn't matter where in the document I put it, if I drag that modified style list in, it'll ask me, do I want to use the text loader? So I say yes. And once it's loaded it in, I click on the styles, there we are. And chapter heading, instead of being at the top of the list, comes after side heading. So it doesn't matter how many, chapters you got, how many pages you've got, how many stories there are in the document. So long as you can delete all the styles in use, which in a document this size can be quite tedious, you can drag a modified style list in and all those styles will reappear and they can be applied as though they were originally part of the book. So if I go in and turn that into a code style, you can see this is still a raised version of code. You can see that's now all in, excuse me, in Corpus. So that's quite a useful thing that anybody who uses impression can take on board. And in fact, I think I'll probably write an article for Archive to, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting a frog in my throat, to show that. Now, I did say earlier that I will show you something else I've been looking at. And to be quite frank, it can get quite, quite tedious working on the same document day in, day out. So I had a look on the existing website. Sorry, wrong one. And there is the original manual that came with the software. And it's an A4 document, and it looks quite different to Ray's book and to the way the book has has developed. Ignore the highlights there. They were just, I put those in to help me identify things. And what I've done is developed a new version of the manual. And if we look at that, there's still a lot to do on this, but I've tried to generate a look and feel very much like Dr. Wimp's surgery. There's still an awful lot to do, and I'm not going to break my neck to get this finished. But at least you can see that it has a quite different look to the original manual. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop sharing now. I think I've probably bored you enough.